Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It's Stu, Binksy and Baldy here to talk about a game where two steamers, both beginning with A and ending in on, were the talk of Lords over the course of this week against the West Indies. We'll also talk some New Zealand cricket contracts as well, all coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, I guess an emotional week for English cricket fans, and potentially we saw a little bit of an emotion from a non-emotional cricket player in James Anderson. But first test of the summer done a little bit later than usual due to the never-ending IPL window, followed by a World Cup. So the first test of an English summer starting on July the 10th, which is pretty late. But look, I guess we're seeing a little bit more of that now with that IPL window. Lords, Jimmy Anderson's daughters and wife rang the 5-minute bell. Not a dry eye in the house at the end of the game. A lot of the 30 or so thousand fans staying behind to see some balcony exploits from James Mark Anderson. But boys, I guess let's get the neutrals' perspective on this test match, because not only obviously noteworthy from that perspective, but a couple of debuts where guys have burst onto the scene, and probably some chat around the West Indies as well, who, if we're being honest, have got blown away inside 2.5 days of test cricket.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's... I was going to say, where do we want to start? Where do we want to start with the Jimmy or talk about the game? But let's talk about the game first then, because I think if you're England, probably, well, one, you're pretty stoked with this result. I mean, you've got the selectors have kind of got, I mean, apart from Bashir, who it's not really the test for him, he didn't really get an opportunity to show what he had to put on the field, but you've got a great performance from Atkinson, and Jamie Smith has come in on debut and got 70 odd. So, all the criticism, I suppose, that the people had levelled at the England selectors, where's folks? Why are we moving on from Jimmy Anderson? I'm going to get those names mixed up. You've set that in my head, Binksy. But yeah, if you're sort of from that point of view, and I suppose even for England, I sort of feel like they needed a big win. And look, this is, like you said, it's the first test of the summer. This can easily happen in English conditions. Teams come in. I think I heard Shamar Joseph had arrived 3 days before, the test. So, it's not like there's a huge amount of build-up. You already touched on it. We've had a T20 World Cup. We've had an IPL. Players have been sort of all over the place and leading up to this test summer. But I really think England have talked a lot of talk. And like you said in the preview to this a couple of, 10 days ago, they actually now need to go out and put some wins on the board, because they haven't necessarily had the wins, even though they were, away in India and they had some tough challenges. But they actually do need to, if they're going to talk like that, they need to go and put the wins on the board. And look, they did that very, very comprehensively in this game.
Yeah, look, I think the notable things for me, and we'll come on, I guess, to probably debut performance from Gus Atkinson and also Jamie Smith, and probably some other talking points from the way the guys batted and bowled and fielded. Actually, I thought England was superb in the field throughout the course of this test match. 2 or 3 absolute screamers. Was the noticeable change of rhetoric, I think, from the England team in the build-up to this series. So I think... we talked a lot about, and there's been a lot of talk, and we can use the phrase now without irony of Bazball. But it was noticeable that for all the talk of playing where your feet are and winning the game that's in front of you, or not even winning the game that's in front of you, but going out and enjoying it and being positive and letting the result look after itself, there's been a change now that they're obviously talking about a changing of the guard from a seaming perspective. They've kind of said, we know that we need this mythical pace to face Australia. If you're going to be successful in an Ashes that's still over a year, probably nearly 18 months or so away. It'll be November, probably the Gabba, won't it, Baldy? I would have thought in 2025 if that ground's not been bulldozed for the Olympics and stuff like that. But the rhetoric change has been really, really notable, I think, and that the team and the management team in particular have probably just calmed down a little bit in terms of the way that they speak about it. And I think they're a little bit focused now on they need to string together some wins so that, when they are on the tarmac at Heathrow in 18 months' time, they're going with a record to match the chat, if that makes sense. So that's probably what I've taken away from the build-up of this. And then, we come on to the performance, which, again, I don't think the West Indies would want to make too many excuses about the lack of preparation. The reality is that is now the way that international cricket is played. I've got to be honest, I'm a little bit sick, particularly of some of the older school journalists who keep asking the question in the post matches. This must be difficult that you've only had one 3-day game. It's been the case for the last 10 years. Just let's shut up about it. That's the way that we're going to be going into these series now. I remember in 1983 when you played every state in Australia twice, plus the Chairman's 11. It ain't going to happen ever again. So let's get off that particular bandwagon. You're going to have to now rock up and adapt your skills. And there's players that are better at doing that and teams that are better at doing that. I don't think the West Indies will hide behind that. But I do think that they will want to massively improve their performance going into the second Test match at Trent Bridge. Their batting is going to be a worry throughout the course of this short series, but their bowling, if they can fire, and I don't think this was a particularly helpful pitch, to be honest, for bowlers in general. It was really that extra pace of Atkinson, I think, that made a lot of the difference. West Indies have got a decent attack in both the Josephs and Jaden Seals and Jason Holder, who's had some success in his tune-up in county cricket. So that they could easily knock over this England side with helpful conditions at Trent Bridge, for example. So yeah, still some cricket to be played, I think, in this series.
Baldy, any thoughts from you? I have sort of plenty of questions for Binksy, but sort of before I start quizzing him on his thoughts from an England perspective, anything from your end?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same story we talk about when we analyse a performance of a well-beaten West Indian side. You go looking for positives. Jaden Seals had a good test match. I thought we had, 4 for 70 odd. Was a little bit expensive, but was probably the pick of the bowlers in terms of his results. I think, Shamar Joseph getting there 3 days before the first test, you saw that in his return as well, looked a little bit underdone. So there are lots of positives that you can look for, but you've got to look pretty hard to find them, especially when you have a look at the combined batting performance of both of those sets of top six. I'm not going to go and criticise the selection. I'm not going to go and criticise the makeup of the top order, whether or not people think that Jason Holder is 1 or 2 too high at number 6. All that kind of stuff is easy in hindsight. But I think West Indies have gone down a track now that they've picked these young guys. They have to stick with them. They have to pick and stick with some of these young players and go, we trust you over this 3-test series against an England side at home. We're going to give you as much rope as you want. Go out and perform and treat the game the way you see your opposition treating that game, which is to play with freedom and to play with clarity in terms of their mindset. Because you could just see that some of those West Indian players looked uncertain. And Gus Atkinson in particular made them pay because he was absolutely there or thereabouts in every aspect.
Yeah. Let's stay on selection for a little bit because we touched on it a bit, and Binksy, I want your thoughts really on Atkinson, but I think that we do have to. I've been kind of playing the selection stuff out in my own head, and actually feel like I've come around and feel like we need to give England a bit of credit to some degree for them actually saying, like, we think these guys have talent, Smith and Atkinson, and they need opportunities at test level. If I think of a New Zealand perspective, we have stuck with the same test 11 largely for a long, long time. And I think in our case, it was probably the right decision in most cases. But you have to actually, at some point, say, like, this is an opposition that we think we can handle, and we want to get these guys some opportunities. And we think Atkinson can do the job, is ready to do the job now. We think Jamie Smith, the best way that he's going to be ready to do the job when we face tougher opposition, which I don't think is disrespectful to the West Indies. I think at some point you have to say, look, test cricket, unfortunately at the moment, we've seen it in the T20 World Cup, right? Any team can kind of beat anyone probably on their day. You know, we saw the US beat Pakistan, we saw Scotland push Australia really hard. Test cricket, I think, to a much bigger degree, is a space where the gap between the first team and the 10th team is actually a lot bigger than the other formats now. And you have to be able to say, look, we're a better side than you, and this is our opportunity to try and give some of these other players a go. And look, they've done it in this game. They've given Smith and Atkinson a go, and Atkinson, you know, in particular, I mean, he's come through with flying colours, hasn't he, Binksy?
Yeah, look, he certainly has. 12, I don't know, 100 and something on debut. He's on the honours board twice. I'm sure they've got the masking tape up and made sure that those numbers have been up there before the engravers managed to get his little gold quill out or whatever they use these days. Look, massively positive for the England team. I think probably where I see the difference between the West Indies selection and the England selection, and this will sound, this was a debut, right? So. But he's been in and around the side for a little while. He's been on tour. He's played some white ball cricket, and I think England have been pretty consistent with their selection in this little mini era of cricket, and they have actually stuck with broadly the same group of players for a 2 and a bit year period now. And they've identified the 15 or 16 guys that they think are good enough. They've picked some horses for courses where they've needed to, and probably in the roles where they wanted to maybe audition. And I think really when we look at the selection of Bashir, for example, they think he's got a higher ceiling than someone like Leach. So they've made some kind of bold calls. I think to your point, Lippy, West Indies need to actually probably stick with a group of players and say, guys, we don't play as much Test cricket as an Australia, as an India, as an England, but let's look at a 20-25 Test match run, and you guys are going to play, you 15 are going to play the majority of them. We want your commitment in order to do that. And that's the way that I think that they probably build that team. And then I think, look, the second piece is that someone like Gus Atkinson, when we contrast him with, say, someone like Shamar Joseph, has just played more cricket. He's been around for 3-4 years on the county scene. He's had sort of 20 or so first class games, I think, under his belt. I'm sure I'll now contradict myself when I look at someone like Shamar Joseph's record, and he's probably played 100 games or something like that. But look, I think ultimately, these guys, Jamie Smith is not a bolter, and he's pulling up trees in the county championship. He's had a couple of decent blast seasons. He's played Lions cricket for England, and he's looked the goods for a period of time in those sort of tournaments, satellite tournaments underneath the World Test Championship, if that makes sense. But yeah, really interested to get Baldy's views probably on Atkinson and whether, based on what you've seen, Michael, can he be successful in Australia with the package that you saw at Lord's over the course of the last 2 or 3 days?
Oh, yeah, absolutely he can. He's got all of the attributes that you need. He's got pace, he's got bounce. He makes the ball do things on good surfaces. Like, as you said, that was a reasonable batting surface. Like 371 wasn't well above par in that England innings, right? So I think he's got tremendous upside in terms of what he can do to Australia going forward. And if Jimmy Anderson is going to hand the baton over, a guy like Gus Atkinson concerns me way, way more than a guy like Ollie Robinson, as good as Ollie Robinson has been. We've seen Ollie Robinson average under 23 in a good portion of his Test career. So, look, Atkinson absolutely has all the attributes to make Aussie cricket fans concerned that he can extract pace and bounce at 140, 145 plus going forward for England. Because he's a young fella. I reckon he's still got another half a yard left in him as he gets stronger in that England setup.
Do we want to cover off a little bit of West Indies stuff before we come back to Jimmy? Because obviously last Test, I think we need to give him some credit. I will just say on the West Indies stuff, I mean, yeah, totally. I think we talked about it a little bit last week when we were talking about their their side. And that batting lineup, I mean, you mentioned it before, Baldy. Jason Holder at 6 looks it looks very brittle on paper, and it's very inexperienced, doesn't it? At test level, but also, I think what Mikhail Louis has played, less than 10 first-class games, hasn't he? I mean, those guys, I even think back to the fact that if they are playing on, look, I think if anyone wants a better view on West Indies cricket than I can give, go listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. There are plenty of other outlets that you can get a more detailed view of the West Indies cricket at the moment. But if we think back to that T20 World Cup, if they are playing first-class cricket on some of those wickets, I don't see how you are building Test cricket batters and to go out and perform around the world in different conditions, because some of those wickets were shockers, to be honest. And if those guys are having to come in, it's no wonder they're averaging 25 to 30 in first-class cricket. And it makes it really tough to go from there to Lords against a decent bowling attack. So, yeah, look, I think you're probably both right in the fact that they have to... There clearly is some talent in some of these guys like Louis and Athanase. I think I've enjoyed at different times, in the small parts that I've seen of him. So, there is some talent there. They just... I don't know. They are probably just going to have to say, look, these are our guys and we've got to stick with you and go with it. And, yeah, hope that experience of playing around the world is going to make the difference. But again, like you said, Binksy, the tricky part is that, 3 teams play a lot of Test cricket at the moment, and the rest of the world sort of has to fit in around them and wait their turn to sort of get a marquee series where they can play more than 2 tests. And that makes it tricky for everyone, to be quite honest.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, let's look at the reality of the first-class scene in the West Indies. It is not giving players the preparation that when they get an opportunity, they can capitalise and maximise it, right? The only time that people are successful in any walk of life, in any form, is where preparation meets opportunity. And these young West Indian cricketers with heaps of potential, with heaps of talent, aren't given the right preparation either from a funding perspective in West Indies cricket, and that's a reality for a lot of Test cricket playing nations at the moment, is the funding just isn't there to develop the game at a grassroots level, and that their first class setup is not producing batters that are averaging 40, 45 plus. It is not purely a West Indies problem. You go and have a look at the averages in Australian first class cricket at the moment, they're way down. Averages around first class cricket, I think maybe with the exception of England and India, are down at the moment. So there's a preparation problem. It's not a question of talent. These guys, I love McKenzie. I quite like Kavim Hodge. I've liked what I've seen, limited sample size of Michaeli Louis. But, these guys aren't playing enough first-class cricket for us to actually be able to say for any certainty whether or not they're going to be good Test cricketers. We think Shamar Joseph might be, but he's only played 8 first-class games. 3 of those, I think, or maybe even more, have been Test matches. So how do you judge? It's very, very difficult. And I think the thing that West India's got to do, Binksy said it, I think we've all said it, they have to pick these guys now. You talk about 25 Test matches, Stu. That's a 4-year window, a 5-year window that they have to actually pick and stick these guys. The batting lineup is all 23, 27. Brathwaite's going to be 35 by that stage. So he's probably got 5 years and then he's on the way out. But then you bring Chanderpaul into that lineup and they're all around that same timeline. So I think the West Indies have got to look at it, and we keep saying it all the time, and go, right, okay, this is a 5-year building period. These are our guys, as we've said, and we've got to build around them. I think Brathwaite is the man to take them forward. Holder's got experience, and they are the ones that are going to have to nurture that culture of performance and stepping up, because all the guys who have got big game experience that are West Indies cricketers, they're all franchise players, and none of them play Test cricket at the moment, really, except for Alzari Joseph, who doesn't play regularly for his franchise side. So those are the guys that have to take the West Indies forward, Brathwaite and Holder, and they're super important to the West Indies being able to do anything in the next 3 or 4 years, I think.
Yeah, and Bordy, just to add, I think we don't want to go down this rabbit hole that the West Indies can only do what's on their World Test Championship in the Future Tours
right.
program now.
Yep, 100% right.
A 25 Tests run should be really over 2 years, not over 3 or 4 years for them. So they need more Test cricket. I think the other factor is that a lot of their talent goes straight into the franchise leagues. So when the guys burst onto the scene in the CPL, they get snapped up and then they're immediately able to go and play the white ball stuff. And, it's this group. And, again, we can't fix this problem, but I think for it to become viable for the resurgence of Test cricket outside of those big 3 or 4 nations, it's going to need some investment into giving an incentive for the West Indies guys, the players, to want to be on the park for that 2 or 3 year window, so that they can hone that craft, because the talent is absolutely there. Athenaeus played, 3 or 4 glorious strokes, couple of little, just opened the face and guided the ball, a brilliant cover drive, a pull with his front leg up, a la Alex Stewart, or name any other player
Greenwich.
that used to do that as well. Greenwich. And so, absolutely have got that talent there. But yeah, they need to have that consistency of getting on the park 12 or 15 times a year together in order to do that.
Boys, it must be just about Jimmy time. But actually, the one other thing I wanted to raise with you, Binksy, is that sort of struck me out of this Test match was Stokes' contribution with the ball. I know we talked about those new guys, but I actually feel like that is quite a significant moment in English cricket in recent times, because just the fact that he bowled that many overs, picked up some good wickets. Like, there was a time, probably 6 months ago even, that I wondered whether he'd even bowl again at Test level because of the way his body's been. But he seems to have come back, pretty fit and rearing to go. So, yeah, that must be pretty exciting from an England point of view.
Yeah, so probably 2 things. I think I do want to mention Jamie Smith, and we've kind of not really talked too much about him. But yes, England's side looked a lot better balanced, I think, in this Test match than it has done for a long, long time. I think the only question that you can probably, ask, and I think this was more a game situation, is Shahid Bashir didn't bowl, but he didn't really need to when you bowl the side out for under 140 twice. So, Stokes being able to bowl a consistent amount of overs, and bowl decent length spells. We saw him return to the bowling crease in the winter, but you were kind of like, oh, how long is he going to be able to go for? But he looked fit, his speeds were good, his consistency was good. He is a very, very skillful bowler. And I think the brilliant thing about Stokes is he's good enough to bowl as a swing bowler. He's good enough to bowl as your hurry up, bowl bouncers bowler. And he's good enough to bowl as a guy that hits a hard area when there's not a lot going on with the pitch as well. So him, and then Jamie Smith, who we can come on to at that sort of 6-7 axis. Now, I said privately to Raj during the course of the week, I think that we could see that axis shift in Jamie Smith actually maybe go to 6 or 5. Because he looks a quality player. He looks a proper batter. And what impressed me about him, I think, and particularly in the advent of Bazball, we'll say it again, is, there's probably an expectation that him coming out and batting at 7, that where he's not used to batting, and then all of a sudden he's in with the tail, you potentially might have seen him go a bit frantic, but he actually didn't. When you actually look at the strike rates, his strike rate was just under 60 in his 70, and it was really only when I think Gus Atkinson and Shahid Bashir came to the crease, and Atkinson's stay was pretty short, that he actually really started to up the ante. He'd batted like a proper Test match, I think number 5 in the early part of his innings. Creates a problem because I think that means we'll have 3 or 4 number 5s, but I think it's a really nice problem to have, that we figure out who is the best guy to bat with the tail, the best guy to bat number 7. And that's, I think, partly why they do like Chris Woakes, particularly in England, because he's a very, very good number 8 in Test match cricket. Chris Woakes, I think, he's got at least 1, if not 2 Test hundreds. So really, really pleased with the introduction of Smith, and also Stokes' return to the bowling crease. Yeah.
You sound like you've converted from Folkes to Smith already, Binksy. Is this the case? What's going on here?
Look, I think the reality is that I don't even think Folkes would have been in the conversation about who was going to keep wicket. I think by the looks of it, they made a decision that they were going to move on from Johnny Bairstow. I wasn't clearly in the selection room, although I'm available, to the ECB should they want the opinion of a slightly overweight, aging wicketkeeper. I think the conversation was around Ollie Robinson of Durham fame as opposed to Ollie Robinson, the seamer. I think it was Jamie Smith, and they maybe had a conversation about Rue as well. But yeah, I think he's probably a couple of years or so away. And look, I think once they'd made that call that was where they were going to go, they've gone with a superior batter. And I think the other thing is he didn't look out of place with the gloves. We've seen, James Bracey, for example, come into the Test side and looked all at sea in a Lord's Test match not too long ago for England. I thought he actually kept pretty well. And interestingly, he's nowhere near Ben Foakes in terms of his keeping quality, but you can tell, I think, that he's spent a bit of time with Ben Foakes. He's a tall man, a little bit like Ben Foakes as well. I think he's 6'2", and his setup and his technique. From a distance, you could almost, just from the setup, you could say that he looks a little bit like Foakes, that modern style of I think they call it a power position. But I thought he kept, more than adequately, and looked unawed, completely unawed with the bat as well. So I was very pleased with that as a debut. Although, heart of hearts, I'd rather watch Foakes keep wicket.
Binksy, Baldy, why don't we come to you before we go to Baldy about Jimmy Anderson? I guess from your point of view, part of you must be like, this is great. Never going to have to see an Aussie facing up to him again. But I know your emotions as a cricket fan, you're often quite sad to see these guys go, that the real true legends of the game. So how did it feel to watch him walk off the field for one last time, and then maybe Binksy can take us through him sculling that pint in the changing rooms?
Look, I won't be able to put it as eloquently as Adam will, but he is one of the few England players that I'll miss once he's gone. I think I said it on the last podcast. He has provided England with 20 years of excellence, unbroken. I don't know that he's had a bad year, Jimmy Anderson, in Test cricket. Maybe he did once, who knows? But he's just been so good for so long, and he's winkled out batters from, the Ponting era through to the Clark era, beyond into the Smith era, and then going forward even again into the next generation. Like he's outthought and figured out so many Australian batters that, look, as a neutral, I'll miss Jimmy Anderson. I'll miss him tremendously. I think, his record, when people look back on it in 50 years, some people will question, well, can he be one of the greats if he averaged 26 with the ball? And the answer to that is absolutely yes, because he is, in my mind, up there with the greatest, most skillful bowlers of anyone that I've ever seen. I put him almost as good as Wasim Akram, and I think Wasim Akram was the most skillful bowler that I've ever seen in my lifetime with the seam up. He was just tremendous. He had everything. He developed that wobble seam sort of 10, 12 years into his career, 2014. I think it was about there that he developed that. That's become like de rigueur for every modern bowler now, has to be able to bowl that wobble seam ball. Jimmy, he didn't invent it, but he perfected it. And I think that's the thing that I think will not go down in history, is that he almost perfected the art of, one, fast bowling, but two, maintaining his fitness and his health and all of the other things that go along with being a fast bowler. It's not just about having, fast twitch muscles and a big bum and, a head full of steam and wanting to knock blokes over. He wasn't like that. He outthought and outsmart and outplayed batters. And he is, if I could borrow some parlance, Stu, the ultimate survivor. And his career was just fantastic. I'll miss him. I really will.
Outwit, outplay, outlast. I enjoyed that little reference there, Baldy. Binksy, you go for it, mate. You tell us whatever you want about Jimmy, because I know he's, as we said last time, he's been a big part of your life for a long time, and you even touched on it there. An emotional week for any English cricket fan, I think, watching this guy down that pint, and obviously all the things he's done on the field as well.
Yeah, look, I guess, yeah, where to start? I jumped on a plane to go and watch the England men's team playing the T20 World Cup final at the MCG a couple of years ago. I was looking at flights to go back and watch this game. As both of you know, I'm lucky enough to be an MCC member, and I genuinely considered making a whatever it is 10,000-mile trip to go and see this because of how much he means to England cricket. I think the lack of synergy with the Stuart Broad retirement is the thing that really probably just stands out for me. The MCC and the ECB obviously wanted to make a little bit of a deal of it. I don't think Jimmy really wanted a bar of that, to be honest. He just wanted to go out and have one last game of cricket with the intention of performing on that stage for a final time. I think the way that he evolved as a bowler is probably the biggest testament to his skills and his longevity. Baldy, I'll disagree with you on the stats. He actually started out the gates pretty poorly. And nearly thought about giving up the game, I believe, after that he remodeled his action and couldn't quite get back to the pace and the swing that he'd had early in his career. And then every year since probably about 06, 07, he's got better and, he's improved. And the synergy with Wasim Akram is an interesting one, Baldy. You would say that Wasim and Waqar didn't invent reverse swing, but they perfected it. I think you're dead right with Anderson. Anderson didn't invent the wobble seam, but I think he knew that he needed something in the armoury when his away swinger wasn't going, the ball was old, the pitch wasn't responsive, and his ability to find plans pretty much everywhere, probably with the exception of Australia. Although didn't bowl badly on the last tour there, to be fair to him. He found ways to get better. And then, look, I think just from a character perspective, I think he has been the leader of that attack. And I think obviously has been the leader of that attack over the course of the last 15 years or so. That's going to be really, really missed. So I'm glad he's sticking around. And you can tell by the way that he just talks to the guys at mid-off and mid-on that he's got a lot of wisdom to impart. And I hope he's able to do that. I did enjoy the Guinness sculling. So he sculled a pint of Guinness on the Lord's balcony. My conspiracy theory, though, is when Sky went into the dressing room at the end of the Test match, which they're not often allowed to do, actually. So I think really, really cool of the England team and presumably MCC to let the cameras and let Nasser Hussain into that dressing room to sit next to Jimmy and do an interview. They panned round the dressing room and they had a bunch of beers on the high table in the dressing room, and there was a case of Guinness, but it was the 0% Guinness. So I really hope that he did enjoy a pint of full fat, full noise Guinness as his first drink after his retirement. And I really hope that the one he scored on the balcony wasn't a 0%er as well. But there you go. Go and watch that. Yeah, go and watch that footage. But he certainly deserves it. I'm not a fast bowler, but I was welling up with tears when he walked off the field for that final time. Got my kids to come and watch it and said, "You're not going to see too many players like this with these kind of stats and this kind of meaning to a national cricket team walk off the field too often." A fantastic career, and wish him the best in his retirement and hope he can impart some of that wisdom to the rest of the boys for the rest of the summer. He says he's going to be at Trent Bridge, and I think he'll be there with a mitt and passing on all of his tips and his tricks. Stu, should we move on and talk a little bit of New Zealand cricket? It's obviously the off-season for us down here, but contracts announced a bit meh. In terms of there's no real sort of notable omissions or inclusions, I don't suppose.
It's hard for us to get excited, Binksy, even just talking about it, right? So, Stuart, you're going to have to really talk up this New Zealand contract situation somehow. Find something. Help us out.
Yeah, look, I mean, the Black Caps contracts have come out. I actually think the White Ferns have come out. Ones have come out or came out just before this. We started recording this, and I haven't actually properly looked at those. So I'll just focus on the Black Caps ones. But yeah, I mean, I think I sort of tend to agree with you that it felt very same old, same old. I will say that I'm not quite sure what else it was supposed to be. I think we have seen, I suppose the last 12 months, New Zealand cricket, there's been a feeling of, right, we're not the team that we were when we won the World Test Championship in 2021. Like, we just aren't that team anymore. We're obviously, on that golden generation, a few of them are gone now. The likes of de Grandhomme and Watling and Neil Wagner we saw depart. He's one of the omissions from this contract list because, he was on the last one. But, and, if you want to look through, we've seen Ben Sears, Will O'Rourke, Rachin Ravindra are on this contract list, and they are, the next generation kind of guys. We've got a return for Ajaz Patel, which I think is more around the fact that we've got a really test-heavy schedule where we play Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and India all away. And so spin's going to be a big factor there. We've got Michael Bracewell, we've got Ish Sodhi, we've got the spin stocks are all getting those contracts, whereas if a lot of those tests were being played at home, I don't think we would see those. We've got Kyle Jamieson taking up a spot who, is injured for almost 12 months, so I don't know if he's going to even play a game in this cycle. But again, I sort of feel like he's someone that we want in this contract list, even if he's not going to play, if that kind of even makes sense. So, I don't quite know what people expect. And I think the trickiest part for New Zealand fans who are wanting that kind of next step and next generation of players to come through, I really think it is in the batting stocks. And unfortunately, I mean, I think the one that's going to irk a lot of New Zealand fans is the fact that Henry Nicholls has still got a New Zealand contract. And, we saw in the past 12 months how, his form is, it's not even just been the past 12 months. His form has been on the decline at test level for a little while now. But I think the reality is the younger guys that are coming through, it is really early days for them. The likes of someone like Mitch Hay, who had a really, really good season for Canterbury, young wicketkeeper, averaged 50 in first-class cricket last season. We saw Tim Robinson burst onto the scene in the Super Smash, got a New Zealand cap when we went over there to play Pakistan in the limited overs stuff. There's guys like Muhammad Abbas, who was also very young. But that sort of next generation of the like 26 to 30-year-old age groups, and probably Dean Foxcroft is at the top of the list of that, didn't really have the domestic seasons that were strong enough to kind of build that case. And I suppose that's probably the one thing where you look at this and go, I wish there was someone really, really banging down the door. Like Binksy mentioned, some of these guys have been doing for England in the first class scene. If Gus Atkinson, Jamie Smith, if we had a Jamie Smith that had, had a couple of sustained years performing for New Zealand A, performing at Plunket Shield, I think we wouldn't see Henry Nicholls on this list. We might see some of these guys starting to get new opportunities. But the way that the New Zealand contracts are done, where I think it is still done this way, in that they rank the top 20 players in each format and who's most likely to play in the games that you've got upcoming. I think our batting lineup is fairly settled in terms of our test lineup, and these are the players who we think will play. The fact that Kane's still going to play in those games, we've got Daryl Mitchell, we've got Devon Conway, Glenn Phillips, all of these guys that are just there. I don't think anyone else is saying pick me, pick me, pick me. And for the players that are, the likes of Nathan Smith, who has had a very good year, seam bowling all rounder, he's not going to get many opportunities to be a seam bowler in India or Sri Lanka or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's tricky. There are guys like Joe Carter and Tom Bruce, and Tom Bruce in particular has averaged 50 in first class cricket. He's got one of the highest first class averages in New Zealand cricket, all time, and still hasn't really had an opportunity, or has never had an opportunity at test level. I guess they have decided that for some reason or another, he's not the answer in the test game. So yeah,
Stu,
I don't know.
Stu, can
Yeah.
I ask a question of you? I think I'll frame this: the stability of your test side over the course of the last 3, 4, even 5 years has been pretty much the same guys. Is it almost a case of, because of that stability, you're going to almost skipping half a generation of players, and maybe some of those younger guys haven't started to fully emerge. They might have had maybe a summer in a format, for example, but not had the ability to knock down the door. And is it a case of some of those guys like a Tom Bruce that maybe just miss out? And look, Baldy, it'll resonate with you, won't it? How many quality batters there were in Australia, for example, in the 90s that did have those kind of seasons where they were averaging 50. I think of guys like Stuart Lord, Jamie Siddams, Jamie Cox, who just never really got a run because of the quality of the guys that were in the 11, and didn't break a finger or do a hamstring, and therefore you can't get past them.
I think there is a bit of that. Yeah, I think you're spot on, because and I think also we probably have to, it's hard, isn't it? It's really is that fine balance between, like I said when we were talking about England, I think that they deserve some credit for saying, like, these guys actually need to have an opportunity, and we have to create an opportunity for them to play. And I think from a New Zealand point of view, we probably would have gone, well, Ben Folkes is doing a nice job, we'll just keep picking him. Like, that's the way that New Zealand have structured their side for a long time, and it brought us a lot of success. But probably now we have to be thinking, okay, like, we're not at our peak. How do we get back to our peak? And it's about going, okay, well, now we have to create some opportunities for this next group of players. I think what we will in reality see is this group of players will play these test series, these away series again, as I just said, away series in the subcontinent, which is, a really tricky ask. It's going to be tough for anyone. They'll go home and they'll play the England series, which will also be quite a challenging one at home, and a big marquee series where we expect that there'll be big crowds, and we've got a 3-test series, so they'll want to put on a good showing there. Then we have the Champions Trophy, and then I think that'll be the time that not necessarily a whole bunch of players retire. We will who knows? Maybe we'll see a few. We've obviously seen Kane opt out of this contract. We've seen Lockie Ferguson, Adam Milne say that decline these contract offers to take up T20 opportunities, and I assume, but so I think at that point if it isn't, that's when I'll be very disappointed from a New Zealand point of view. I think that is the time to go, okay, like, that'll almost be basically the end of the World Test Championship cycle as well. And we have to go, probably we need to use this next World Test Championship cycle to build our squad and start, it's not about making wholesale changes and start cutting everyone, start saying, okay, Daryl Mitchell, like, you're over 30, you have to go now. But it's about saying, when we do have an opportunity, it's about bringing guys in the right way, which, they have blooded Rachin Ravindra, and they've probably done that slower than a lot of people would have liked. But in some ways, I think they've got him to the point of, as you again talked about with England squads, he's been in and around that squad for a long time now, and now he's in a position where him and Glenn Phillips can kind of carry that forward and go into their early test careers having a lot of international cricket and a lot of international experience around them. So they're going to have to find a way to do that with the likes of Mitch Hay, maybe someone like Addy Ashok, some of these other players, get them in squads, get them a lot of international cricket, and start introducing them to test cricket, because, otherwise it is, like you say, we're going to have missed a generation, and suddenly you're going to have all these other guys disappear eventually, and all these, we're going to be in a situation where, like the West Indies, where you've got a whole batting lineup of players that have played less than 10 tests. So, so it's a tough one. But, I think a year of, not this year of transition for New Zealand cricket, but the next one, the next list of contracts might look quite different, maybe.
Well, I'm sure we'll be back on the podcast at that point to chat about Stu. It is, looking forward to the summer here. We got England over in New Zealand again this summer. It was a fantastic spectacle last time round. And yeah, some cricket in between then as well, of course, which we'll cover on the Top Order podcast. But yeah, next time we probably speak to you will be the first test in the PA. That's the post-Anderson era for England against the West Indies coming up at Trent Bridge. And we'll also obviously bring you any interesting tidbits from around the rest of the cricketing world as well. But for now, it is good night and good bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you next time on the Top Order podcast. See you later.